What's up, guys? I want to talk about wrist angles, how they affect the golf swing and how they affect your club face. Because essentially, when we talk about wrist angles, we're talking about the club face and how it controls it. So let's talk about what this left wrist does. There's a lot of tour players out there. You got John Rahm, you have Dustin Johnson. Both those guys have a really bowed left wrist. Now, does that apply to you, and is that something you need to look for? Well, sometimes the grip changes when you get more flexion or you want more extension. So we're going to talk about those different things right here. Okay, so let's talk about flexion. Now, when you look at John Rahm and you look at Dustin Johnson, they both have a little bit weaker grip. Why? A weaker grip will make it easier to get into a flex position. So when you get a really strong grip like this, okay, so meaning the hands are more on top and more to the right, or this hand gets more underneath, more to the right, it's harder to go into flexion at the top. It's harder to want to bow that wrist. Now, if I go into a weak grip, which a weak grip would be left hand a little more to the left, a little bit more under, so the thumb going more right down the middle than the side, and this hand maybe a touch on top. Now, a lot of the good players, when they have a weak hand, their left hand's weak, but their right hand is normal, maybe a little stronger. What's normal nowadays? But they get a weaker left hand, and it's a lot easier to fill that flexion with the weak grip. Okay? So if you like this, and this helps you shallow you out on the downswing, because this can be a way of shallowing the downswing, you might look at going to a little bit weaker grip to get into that position. Because if you struggle getting the shaft to pitch back this way on the downswing, and you struggle going this way, flexion is a good way to get it back there. Because just by going into flexion, I'm more shallow. It's going to be hard to go into flexion and get steeper. Not impossible, but it's a lot harder. Okay? So we want the club to do this. Flexion is a good way to do it. To do that, though, to make it to where you can get into flexion easier, you have to get a weaker grip. Okay? And maybe something you have to get used to. And that's totally fine. Now, if you want to go into more of a cup position, then you might get a little bit stronger grip, because you go back to the normal strong grip where thumbs on the side, V's going to the right shoulder, right hand V's going to the right shoulder. That makes it easier to go into a little bit of a cup position or a flat wrist. You look at guys like Justin Thomas, Tiger, all those guys, they look for a pretty flat wrist. Now, they have a stronger grip. Okay? Now, I haven't seen it yet. I'm sure it's out there. But I haven't seen a strong grip in flexion, just because you're probably going to hook the ball pretty bad if you do it that way. Okay? But let's talk about what that does when you get flexion and extension of the wrist. So you got flexion and extension. Okay? So if you look at the club face, I'll point it right here. I'll tell you what. Let me get on both camera angles here so you can see this. Okay? If you look at the club face right there, all right? When you go into flexion, it spins the shaft closed. Okay, it just spins it, right? It's not a release pattern or anything like this. It just spins it closed. By going into flexion, it spins it closed, just like this. When you go into extension, it spins it open. So when you go to the top of your swing, if you're in extension, you're spinning the shaft open. And then when you go into flexion on the downswing, you're spinning it shut. Okay? That's how the best players in the world square the club face up. It's not by this hard release like this, like most people do. They try to throw the club head at the golf ball like this. They try to throw it, and they try to save it by forearm rotation. Forearm rotation is a way to square the club face up. A lot of good players have done it, but it's harder to time. You can get a lot of practice in and get good at it, but it is harder to time. So what's better is to actually be able to get the club face to spin into position by flexing that left wrist or going into extension. Most time it's going into flexion. All the good players go into flexion. By spinning that, that's actually going to square the club face up. Okay? Now, when we talk about positions, one of the most important positions besides impact is right here. When the club gets parallel to the ground, we call this the delivery position. We want this club to deliver at a 45-degree angle because it's matching our spine angle. Our spine angle is 0, okay? So when I turn and I take it back, it's at a 45-degree angle. When I come down, I want it back at that 45-degree angle. I don't want it like this, and I definitely don't want it like this, because if I'm too much open like this, I'm gonna have a hard time squaring it up. Now, if you're a guy that likes to really release it over and get a big sweeping draw, that might be for you. Okay, I'm not saying there's one way to swing a golf club. I'm saying when it comes to flexion, and we talk about hitting a little bit straighter golf shots, the people that hit it straighter, they typically get the club face right here, and then in this delivery position, all they got to do is rotate into impact. Okay, so when you look at Dustin Johnson and John Rahm, right? Those are the two guys that I think of the most when I think of wrist flexion. When they get to the top of their swing, they hold that position and then they turn. They basically have locked it. And so it makes the club face so stable. That's why they're such good ball strikers, because there's not a lot of this going on. There's not a lot of movement of the wrist. They're able to lock that into position and use their body rotation. Well, what's the name of the game? It's controlling the club face. Okay, so we got to control this club face. So when they do that, they control the club face, because all they got to do is rotate. Now, they do release it. Don't get me wrong. They're not holding it. Like, in a sense, you're not letting the release go. 100% they're releasing it, because you can't play golf that way. However, when they're coming down, that face is in such a stable position, and then they come through here and then they release it, it's square a lot longer than most. That's why this is starting to become really popular. Matt Wolff is another example. It's becoming really popular because you don't have to time the face as much. Okay, so it is a good way. It's not the only way. Tiger Woods doesn't play that way, and he's one of the best ball strikers to ever live. So I'm not saying that's the way you should do it. All I'm talking about is helping you understand it. Okay, so what you can do for some drills if you want to work on this flexion drill. Like for me, I'm trying to get a flatter wrist, not going to flexion. I'm actually trying to get a flatter left wrist. I just work on going to the top, flat wrist right there, and then I turn through. And I'm really focusing on the downswing, getting into a little bit of flexion. Okay, so you can do some drills where you take it back real short, flexion, and then you pivot and rotate through. Okay, so I'm going to hit a couple shots here. So we're going to go here, flexion, pivot through. Okay, just like that. All right, let me hit another one. So we're going to go here, flexion, pivot on through. Lots of body rotation. Here, flexion, pivot on through. Okay? If you do that right, you'll start to get a more right to left ball flight. Now, the other key point is when you go into flexion, remember you want to flex it and you want to get that club back to this position. So another good drill is to go here, flexion, feel that position. So go flexion, flexion, feel that in that position, pivot through. Just to get an idea of where the face is. If you're trying to get rid of a slice or the ball's fading too much on you, you want to hit a little straighter to a draw, then what you'll do one practice swing here, there, so now it's in the position there, and then hit a golf ball. Okay, pivot on through. Okay? Now, one other thing to note, why flexion's good. Now, flexion's a good thing, okay? We want to, on the downswing, flex that left wrist a little bit on the downswing, because what that does, it helps promote forward shaft lean. Okay? Because you can't have forward shaft lean with the extension of the wrist. You just can't. It's impossible. So what happens is when you get into impact, there's a little bit of flexion, or we can call it straight wrist right here. It's pretty straight, right? It's definitely not an extension, right? So if on the downswing you can get into a little bit of flexion, by the time you get to the golf ball, you're in a better position. Because most people that scoop the golf ball, they do this, they throw it straight into extension. Okay, so if we can get here, another good drill is take the club like this, and see how I rolled that down? I'm pulling down the shaft, and see how the head is spinning closed? Okay, so again, there. See how I'm feeling that spin close? So then when you go here, boom, see it's at that 45-degree angle, and then you pivot through. Okay, so I hope I've explained a little bit how wrist flexion works, kind of what it does. It spins the shaft. If you're trying to get the club face in a more square position because you're hitting the ball too far right, this might be a good option for you. Give it a shot. If you have any more questions on drills, go to my website. You can ask me questions. I do have a membership website if you're interested in that. But besides that, guys, please give me a like. And please subscribe, and please hit the notification bell. It really helps me out if you like this video, helps other people see it. Help me grow. Thanks for watching this video. Work on that wrist flexion.